Good morning, Grace family. Excellent to be here with you on Friday, looking at the text of Scripture of Ecclesiastes chapter 7. Going to be looking at verses 1 to the end of the chapter. And I have to give a little bit of a disclosure here. Koheleth, who is the preacher, the person who is either quoted or the author of the book, or maybe both, um, is going to be giving us some wisdom here in his proverbs, and some people have called these anti-proverbs. These are anti-wisdom. And again, we have to remember something very important, specifically about Ecclesiastes, that Koheleth's words are not normative biblical teaching. The Bible is kind of portraying this man as a confused wise man who's being quoted at length and then commented on by a second wise man as he instructs his son concerning the dangers of living under the sun. That's the concept that we continually see, is this wise man dealing with the wisdom under the sun without reflection of eternality, without the reflection of what God is going to do post our everyday existence and experience on the earth. And so we have to recognize that there's going to be some components and things here that we're like, wait, what? And we have to be wise in how we interpret and how we understand these passages. So I'm going to try to help you do that this morning in Ecclesiastes chapter 7. We're going to try to get through this whole text, and it's going to bring up more questions. I'd be happy to meet with you and to discuss what those are and how to answer those questions if you'd like. So chapter 7, starting verse 1. A good name is better than a precious ointment, and the day of death than the day of birth. It is better to go into the house of mourning than to go in the house of feasting. For this is the end of all mankind, and the living will lay it to heart. Sorrow is better than laughter, for by sadness of face the heart is made glad. The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of mirth. It is better for a man to hear the rebuke of the wise than to hear the song of fools. For as the crackling of thorns under a pot, so is the laughter of fools. This is also vanity. Surely oppression drives the wise into madness, and a bribe corrupts the heart. Better is the end of a thing than its beginning, and the patient in spirit is better than the proud in spirit. Be not quick in your spirit to become angry, for anger lodges in the heart of fools. Say not, were those the former days better than these? For this is not wisdom that you ask this. Wisdom is good with an inheritance, an advantage to those who see the sun. For the protection of wisdom is like the protection of money, and the advantage of knowledge is that wisdom preserves the life of him who has it. Consider the work of God, who can make straight what he has made crooked. In the day of prosperity be joyful, and in the day of adversity consider God has made the one as well as the other, so that man may not find out anything that will be after him. Verse 15. In my vain life I have seen everything. There is a righteous man who perishes in his righteousness, and there is a wicked man who prolongs his life in his evil doing. Be not overly righteous, and do not make yourself too wise. Why should you destroy yourself? Be not overly wicked, neither be a fool. Why should you die before your time? It is good that you should take hold of this, and from that withhold not your own hand, for the one who fears God shall come out from both of them. Wisdom gives strength to the wise men, more than 10 rulers who are in the city. Surely there is not a righteous man on the earth who does good and never sins. Do not take to heart all the things that people say, lest you hear your servant cursing you. Your heart knows that many times you yourselves have cursed others. All of this I have tested by wisdom. I said, I will be wise, but it was far from me. That which has been far off and deep and very deep, who can find it out? I turned my heart to know and search out, to seek wisdom in the scheme of things, and to know the wickedness of folly and the foolishness of madness. And I find something more bitter than death, a woman whose heart is snares and nets, and whose hands are fetters. He who pleases God escapes her, but the sinner is taken by her. Behold, this is what I found, says the preacher, while adding one thing to another, to find the scheme of things, which my soul has often repeatedly. But I have not found. One man among 1,000 I have found, but a woman among all these I have not found. See, this alone I have found, that God made man upright, but they have sought out many schemes. So we're going to conclude the chapter there. Let's go ahead and take a look a little bit. As we get down through this text, we'll kind of get down to the end, and I can kind of give you my interpretation, especially some of those last verses, which for many of us is like, whoa, what did he just say? And yes, you did hear him right. So the preacher here is providing a list of his own proverbs, and like I said before, some people have described these as almost anti-proverbs, anti-wisdom. But it really is an assessment of wisdom based on the perspective of someone from under the sun. And so Kohelet continues by giving his advice through a series of proverbs. These proverbs follow at least indirectly from his life experience, with his conclusion that life is ultimately meaningless. We learn about Kohelet's values in this section, and it's no accident that he frequently uses the so-called better than proverbial form, since he does not find anything that's absolutely meaningful and good as he looks under the sun. Ultimately, he's reduced to suggesting that some things are only better than others. And here, we must admit, the teacher surprises us specifically by what he views as what is better and what is worse, especially if we compare it what he's saying to the other parts of the Old Testament and other places that we might find wisdom recorded. So looking at verses 1 through 12, we see two specific themes: life and death, which is in verses 1 through 4 and verse 8, and wisdom and folly, which is 5 through 12. And so he starts off by saying a good name is better than a precious ointment, and the day of death better than the day of birth. And I think they're related because when you die, if you die with a good name, your good name stays through your death. If you don't, then obviously, you have nothing. A day of birth, it means really nothing about you and who you are, or anything like that. And if anything, it's, as he's discussed before, death is rest. At the very least, birth is to exist in torment and toil. And even if you find some joy in some things, like that's it. You still have toil for that. And so there's this element to which he doesn't see life as valuable. He sees death as better. And so he then goes in, if he believes that and he holds that, which he says, then verse 2 is logically what follows. It's better to go to funerals than parties. Why? Well, because it's better in keeping with the reality. Parties are celebrations of life, and funerals are a reminder that everybody dies. And so if, again, life under the sun is just a reflection of what is meaningful, then, well, what is meaningful can't be known, and ultimately the only thing that's known is after death there's something, but we don't know what. We can't be told what. And so we just might as well just get there, because everything is toil and meaningless until we're there. And so there's this element to which he's just kind of saying, well, better to go in the house of mourning than the house of feasting. It's more real to existence of life. And that's what he says specifically, for this is the end of all mankind, and the living will lay it to heart. He says it's better off to be thinking about the fact that, look, we're going to die, and that's the meaning of life, and that's the end. That's where ultimately everything is at. And we can't know anything beyond that. He then goes on and continues to talk about how sorrow is better than laughter. And I think verse 3, the ESV does a little bit of a poor job here translating what the word here is for sorrow. So I'm going to give it to you again, Brown, Diver, and Briggs. Specifically, vexation and anger is what this word means. It can mean, if you look down here on the third meaning that they provide, vexation and grief. I think that's a fair interpretation of what it's trying to say. Sorry, I realized when I highlighted that you weren't able to see. Hold on 2 seconds here and I'll highlight it properly. Right here. That's the definition that ESV is taking it, but they're even going, I think, a step further and giving you kind of a word that means more than what we would understand this word to mean. There's this idea of vexation, which is consistent through Ecclesiastes. And so here, it's not sorrow is better than laughter. It's vexation is better than laughter. This grief, this kind of irritation, this anger, this is better than laughter. Why? And then it uses by the sadness. Again, this word, again, not exactly the best translation. Certainly sadness can be translated here. There's one other place where this word is translated sadness, but the idea is kind of a bad quality. And it's used multiple times in that kind of way. And so he's saying that ultimately the bad quality of your face, by you kind of crunching up your face and getting upset about it, it makes your heart feel better. I think this is that response, that vexation is better for you because it causes you to respond in your emotions, which helps against your vexation. It really kind of an odd way of looking at things, but that's how he sees it. In verse 4, it says, the heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of mirth. Ultimately, if you're wise, you're going to be constantly in mourning and sadness because life is meaningless and purposeless, again, under the sun. But the heart of fools is in the house of mirth and happy. He then says it's better for a man to hear the rebuke of the wise than to hear song of fools. Right? We don't hear the song of fools. Listen to rebuke. And he says the song of fools is as a crackling thorns under a pot. So is the laughter of fools. Crackling thorns under a pot. They burn up fast and they make lots of noise, but they're of no value and they don't really last. And he says ultimately this is a vanity. Surely oppression drives the wise into madness, and a bribe corrupts the heart. And so he talks about the evilness. We've talked about that before. Chapter 3, chapter 4, again a little bit in chapter 5. And he says ultimately, verse 8, better is the end of a thing than its beginning. And I think that's a little bit of an element similar to what we're talking about with death. And then he says, and the patient in spirit better than the proud in spirit. Just wait for things to work itself out. You'll see how it works out in the end under the sun. And then he says, and this is interesting because we don't want to misunderstand verse 3 of being we should just act in anger, because he says actually, be not quick in your spirit to become angry, for anger lodges itself in the heart of the fools. And so there's this element, which this is a wrathful anger that's responding in anger to people. He says, don't be quick to become that way. Don't let it lodge in your heart. That's foolish. And likewise, he makes another statement, which I think I hear this statement all the time. He says, basically in verse 10, he says, don't say, why were the former days better than these? And we hear this all the time. Oh, it was so much better in my day or whatever. And his point is, this isn't wisdom that you asked this, because the reality is it's not those days anymore. And so, he's arguing why reflect on the past? Again, under the sun, doesn't make any sense to reflect on the past. He says wisdom is good with is good with an inheritance. Wisdom is good with money. It's an advantage to those who see the sun, because protection of wisdom is like the protection of money. The advantage of knowledge is that wisdom preserves the life of him who has it. So like wisdom and money, he says, are basically, they're very similar. Wisdom can protect you and can keep you from having difficulty, and so can money. And he's like, so it's advantage to both under the sun to have wisdom and to have money. And then he kind of, in verse 13, he kind of goes into the last two Proverbs form kind of the conclusion. In verse 13 and 14, the last two Proverbs, and he says, consider the work of God, who can make straight what he has made crooked. And this goes back to the point that we've been seeing throughout Ecclesiastes. God is making providentially ways of things happening. It's on him, and no one can know why he does what he does. Verse 14, again, the day of prosperity be joyful. In the day of adversity consider. God has made both the one, the day of prosperity, as well as the day of adversity. And he says that God made those things so that man may not find out anything that will be after him. He says, the wise man who's supposed to receive only good from God occasionally receives bad. And this is what we see in Job, right? Where Job is like, I've not done anything wrong. And his friends are like, sure you have. God only, gives good to good people and does bad to bad people. And Kohelet here is recognizing under the sun that some people live righteously, and yet God gives them adversity. And some people live in prosperity and they've been evil. And so in a sense, he's read the Proverbs and he goes, this isn't always true. And he's exactly right. And he says that it's so that man may not find out anything that will be after him. It's so that man can't make an assessment about how God feels towards him. Again, this meaningless, unable to determine, unable to know. The man just doesn't seem to know his scriptures very well. Again, wisdom under the sun, not according to God. And so verse 15, he continues that kind of ideology. And he says, in my vain life, I've seen everything. There's a righteous man who perishes in his righteousness, and there's a wicked man who prolongs his life in his evil doing. So he concludes in verse 16, very interesting. He says, don't be overly righteous, and don't make yourself too wise. Don't be those two things. Now this is completely contrary to Proverbs chapter 2 in the words of Solomon. The reality is in Proverbs chapter 2, he says, my son, if you receive my words and treasure up my commandments with you, making your ear attentive to wisdom, inclining your heart to understanding, yes, if you call out for insight and raise your voice for understanding, if you seek it like silver and search it for hidden treasures, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. For the Lord gives wisdom, and from his mouth comes knowledge and understanding. He stores up sound wisdom for the upright and is a shield to those who walk in integrity, guarding the paths of righteousness and watching over the way of his saints. Then you will understand righteousness and justice and equity and every good path, for wisdom will come into your heart. And so this is contrary to what Solomon says. Again, if this is Solomon, he's contradicting himself here. But if this is wisdom under the sun, and this is wisdom without a reflection of what God has shared, this is basically don't go too far one way or the other, because it doesn't make any difference. Why should you destroy yourself? He says, be not overly wicked, don't be a fool, because why should you die before your time? But ultimately, this is what it is. It is good that you should take hold of this, and from that withhold not your hand. For the one who fears God shall come out from both of them. He says, ultimately, fear God, and don't be overly righteous. Don't be overly wise. Don't walk like a fool. Don't be wicked. Just kind of ride the line, and whatever happens, God will take care of. And fear God, fear Him, because obviously He's the one that controls everything. Again, verse 19, wisdom gives strength to the wise men more than 10 rulers of the city. So he says that wisdom's good. Surely there's not a righteous man on the earth who does good and never sins. He ultimately recognizes that no one is truly innocent and righteous. And so ultimately, we just fear God. So it's interesting, even under the sun, he comes to that perspective. And so he then concludes, kind of going into, do not take to heart the things that people say. When people curse you, when you hear your servant cursing you, don't take to heart, because you've cursed others. You've done horrible things. And then he says, all of this I've tested by wisdom. I said that I will be wise, but it was far from me. Now, Koheleth here is stating he's never found wisdom. He feels like wisdom has always been far from him. Again, another reason why I don't think that this is Solomon. And that which has been far off and deep and very deep, who can find it? And he's saying, I can't find wisdom. I can't find out all the things that are behind the sun. I can only see the things around me, observe the things around me, and this is what I can know. And so he said, I turn my heart to know and search out and to seek wisdom in the scheme of things, to try to know how things are to operate. Again, like what we were talking about before, looking under the sun to try to see, how does God work? And ultimately he finds a couple things. One, he finds some of the proverbs are true, that a woman whose heart is snares and nets, whose heads are fetters, he who pleases God escapes her, but a sinner is taken in by her. And so he concludes with what Solomon says earlier in Solomon, don't go to the house of the adulterous woman. But then he says, well, but there really is no righteous man. In fact, only 1 in 1,000 have I found. That there's been 1 in 1,000 men who are righteous, who are wise. And he's like, and I haven't found a single woman who's that way. Now you could argue that that's derogatory towards women. I think part of what he's saying specifically here is he's doing something a little bit different. And I think what he's saying here is not necessarily that you don't find any women who are wise. Now, he may be saying that might be his experience. But I think it's more of the idea that people are going to turn and find their own path. They're going to find their own things. And in that, specifically, he's pursuing wisdom. Woman has been personified as wisdom in Proverbs. And he's saying, I've not found wisdom. I've not found that woman of wisdom that was spoken of in Proverbs. And in fact, I haven't even found a man of wisdom. And I think that's the element of what he's saying there. Certainly, maybe there's another element of what he's saying there is derogatory to women. I can't really argue that one way or the other. But either way, verse 29, see this alone I have found, that God made man upright, but they have sought out many schemes. The reality is God created man and started man being upright, but men have not stayed upright. They have sinned. They have followed after their own schemes to try to meet and match their lusts and their desires. And so because of that, ultimately, oppression, injustice, and foolishness reign supreme under the sun. So those are the words of Koheleth, the preacher, from Ecclesiastes. We'll get into chapter 8 next. Take care. God bless.